Good morning, CCMP family. Pastor Jason here this wonderful Wednesday with all of y'all. I hope you've had a great week so far. It is a gorgeous day in North Carolina as I look out of the windows here, and I had someone this morning actually complained. I got to go hang out with the classics this morning, and someone said, it's just so hot. And you know, isn't it funny how our perspective can determine the reality that we live in and walk in? And the perspective of when it's in the winter, it's too cold, or when it's in the summer, it's too hot, and all of those different perspectives that we had. And really, let's begin to change that perspective. No, it's a little hot, but guess what? It's not rainy. We can go outside. It's not freezing. I'm not going to freeze my butt off, and I can go outside and actually not have to wear a parka. And, you know, I like the snow, but I'm going to go and enjoy this. And so I hope you're enjoying this day. I hope you're enjoying this week. I hope if you didn't catch last Sunday's service, go check out, download the CCMP app, get the little green circle on your smartphone. Also do that, or go to the website, and I want to encourage you to check out the sermon from last week. Not actually for the sermon's sake, but for the sake that we honored our graduates. And it was an awesome time to honor the accomplishments of the young people in our church. 24 graduates. 24. It was a lot. 18 of them actually were present at the various services that we got to honor them, and it was just really beautiful. And so go back, check that out. Amazing. We got to challenge our graduates, and not just our graduates, but we also challenged everyone present. And I want to challenge y'all today. How are you doing remembering things? It's been a good week to reflect on just our ability to recall and remember the things that we have long since probably forgotten. I was reading actually the story this week with my kids and my kids' Bible time. We have a little story Bible that we read through, and we read about Josiah. And when Josiah was the king, the people of Israel for hundreds of years had actually lost the Torah. They had lost the law, but yet, so they're still trying to follow God, but yet they had forgotten. And I wonder in our own lives, what are the little things, well actually the things that we think are little, but really they're major, and we've forgotten them along the way. So one of those challenges that we did, we brought them out of 2 Kings 13, verses 14 through 20, and today I want to look at again, that scripture again. So if you missed the missed Sunday, here's a little snippet of that. But I want to look also intentionally this time at verses 14 through 17. But the challenges that I gave the graduates, and then we also gave everyone present and all of you watching today, was this. One, don't forget to take aim at something. Don't forget to take aim at something. And I think a lot of us, we've got to stop wasting what we have fighting for what doesn't matter. So often, I think, if you're like me, I'll get so focused on all of the minutiae and little details around me, and whenever I do that, I feel like I'm fighting 500 things, and really, there's only one task in front of me that I need to be focusing on. And we're in the process of fighting something, and most of the time that we're fighting those things, we're fighting things that are actually never going to happen, or they're going to happen regardless if we're stressed out about them or not. And so, I don't know how you are, but whenever I'm doing that, I get so worn out by the time I actually get to whatever the battle actually is, that I lose along the way. And so we need to aim at what's important. Remember, we don't forget what we need to take aim at. Don't get so focused on a hobby that you forsake your marriage, that we forsake the children that we're raising. Don't forsake the relationship above all, right, that we have with our Heavenly Father. And because when we forsake and we forget those relationships and those priorities that God has built into our life, we begin to focus on the wrong things. So don't forget to take aim. Don't forget where you're posted. The king that we're going to read about today, and we read about on Sunday, the king's own expectations got in the way, and he wasn't able to be committed to the process where he was at. Don't forget where you're posted. Don't forget what responsibilities you have in the season of life that you're in. And I want us to understand, see, we get so worried about, can I handle the post that I'm in? And we need to understand God's the one that allowed us to be posted there to begin with. And we need to understand the pain of falling short is so much less than the pain of stopping short. And that's where we saw the king failing on his post. Elisha gives him these tasks and strike the ground with the arrow, and he stopped after 3 times. And so we can't stop. Do the task that God's given you where you're posted. Don't forget where you're posted. And ultimately, don't forget the point of it all. Don't forget the point of it all. And we miss the opportunity to grow in our knowledge of Him, and we miss the opportunity to trust the teacher along the way, and understanding that even though the process seems insignificant, God is the one that multiplies us, and we learn to trust the teacher in the insignificant before we can ever step into the seasons of significance, or what the world and even our own selves say is significant. So don't forget, our greatest strength lies in the knowledge of Him and our ability to turn to Him. So every day we need to remember. If we can begin to remember those 3 things, I think we'll be set up for success. Which leads me today to this thought of provision, which is one of those concepts that we can remember. It's a real practical aspect that we can remember every day. And the fact that declaring today that God's got what you need today. But it's a matter of you receiving it. I got to challenge everyone on Sunday with the expectation of when Pastor Snow or myself or whoever's preaching shows up, we expect that whoever's on the pulpit to be prepared to preach, or the worship team should be prepared to sing, and all of these different expectations that we put on other people. But yet, have we prepared ourselves to get ready to receive? Have we tilled the soil of our own hearts to be able to receive what we claim God wants to speak through this individual that stands up there on Sunday mornings? Is our heart ready to receive? And see, I love this imagery of the window that we're going to read about today. It's what you look through the window. I've got these 2 beautiful windows in here. And a window is something that you look through. And sometimes I need us to understand what you look through is just as important, and maybe more important, than what you're looking at. Right? Because what you're looking at can twist the dimensions of what you're seeing. I wore contacts and glasses for the longest time. I had LASIK a few years back. But the reason I needed those was because my eyes, the way that when light hit my eyes, it wasn't focused, and the dimensions of what I was looking at was twisted, and I couldn't see what I was looking at clearly because the window that is my eye had messed up dimensions. And so it matters what you're looking through. What relationships are you processing a certain event through? What background do you bring? What habitual tendencies have you brought into your relationship with Christ? And that's going to determine the way that you interpret a preaching or a teaching, or interpret when you read this word. And that may not be the healthiest lens to read the Bible through. It can change the way you look and read a situation. But a window, I believe, also represents provision. I think of Malachi 3, and one of the things that is taught through the prophet there is, if you will release what's in your hand, then God will release what's in His heart. And I love that because God wanted to bless the people there, but the windows in their hearts and their minds were closed. Is it possible, and as I get into the actual meat today, is it possible that provision and perspective are one and the same thing? Let's jump into this. Let's jump into this today. And actually, it's funny. This thought came to my mind of the feeding of the 5,000 in John 6, because this idea of provision and perspective being in the same place. And before I get into 2 Kings 13, I'm thinking we all can relate. Most of us have heard the feeding of the 5,000, and it's an interesting story, right? Because Jesus tasked His disciples with feeding. All these people didn't come for the disciples. All the people came for Jesus. But yet, Jesus tasks the different disciples with, man, God, I need you to go and find food for these people. And then you have Philip on one hand adding it up and calculating out and looking at it from a bottom-up perspective and saying it would take 8 months' wages to feed all of these different individuals. And then you have Andrew, and I love Andrew, and I pray that I have a heart of Andrew. Why? Andrew doesn't say anything in the Gospels except right here. And I pray that this is my life. If people don't remember anything that I say, but yet I gave God glory, it was all worth it. So here's Andrew, and all that we know of Andrew from the Gospels is his ability to find lunch, find provision find what little bit they have and what in the area that they're in. I still think that he stole the little boy's lunch, maybe, but yet he brings a little boy's lunch to Jesus and says, "This is all we have." A top-down perspective, but then he asks Jesus the question, how much is so little in the presence of so many? But the beauty of what he did was he brought what little he had to Jesus. And what I love there is Jesus did not supersede the meager supply of the disciples. And the interesting part of that, as we're getting into this, he didn't bypass it, he multiplied it. Jesus doesn't bypass what you have. He wants to multiply what you have. And the little bit of time that you have, even when it seems insignificant, see, the whole process of provision starts when you offer what you have. The whole process of provision starts with what you have. When you see, man, I have this little bit of time going from point A to point B on my drive. How can I use that to give that to God as an offering? And God will multiply that time. Yesterday, my son had a bad attitude, and I got out of the car, and I was hungry. Everyone was hungry, and so everyone's grumpy when you're hungry. But yet, how can I take the time from getting out of the car to going to the table and eating and sitting down with my son and saying, Joshua, why do we have a bad attitude? And processing through that, and I can use that little bit of time, because little is much when it's in the hands of an almighty and all-powerful God. But let's jump into this. But that's where we're going today. I want us to see how provision, we need to remember and not forget that God gives us the provision every day. So let's start. 2 Kings chapter 13, verses 14 is where I'm going to start at. Now, when Elisha had fallen sick with the illness of which he was to die, Joash, king of Israel, went down to him and wept before him, crying, my father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." And see, the beauty of that verse is pressure will always cause you to seek provision, and pressure will always push you to a place where you need to get your priorities right. You always want to get your priorities in order when you get in a season of pressure. And so often God will allow us to go into a season of pressure, not because it's what he wants to, because he wants to see us suffer or struggle. No, he'll allow us to go to a season of pressure because he needs us to understand that we need to go to him, and the only honest thing that we can get is provision from him. That is the only provision that will ever last. And so it took the Arameans, it took the Syrians, as we're going to see, to get the king to a place where he needed to go to God. And he's going to the prophet Elisha. And Elisha represented the entire defense system for the people of Israel at this point in time. He was their perspective. He was their provision. He would give them the right perspective on, well, this is what God's doing and this is what God is positioning. And he would tell them how to overcome certain obstacles in their life and as a nation. And it's a cool thing to think about. Elisha never actually stopped and prevented the battle. A lot of us think that God's provision means prevention. No, God's provision never means prevention. I'm helping fix your perspective today. God's provision is never a prevention of problems. And see, here's the beauty. I need to paint this for you, because why would you ask God for a life? A lot of us are asking God for better things and better lives and better possessions, but why would you ask God for a life that would prevent your need for him? He's never going to get rid of your need for him. And so that's what we need to understand. Elijah never prevented the obstacles, but he gave them away. It's just in 1 Corinthians 10, right? You'll never be tempted more than you can bear, but God, turning it over to God, will always provide you a back door of escape. And so we need to understand that. So that's the situation. So the king is weeping, but Elisha, we're going to see, is pointing, and he's pointing at the provision. So let's get into that. Verse 15. And Elijah said to him, here he is, he's pointing, take a bow and arrows. So he took a bow and arrows. This bow, this arrows, They didn't magically appear in the room. It wasn't like supernatural God. The heavens opened up and boom, here's a bow, here's an arrow. No, the bow and the arrows were already present in the place. They had been there the whole time. He is simply instructing the king, hear this and see this. God is speaking through Elijah, and Elijah is saying, simply pick up the things that are already in your presence. They're already located right in front of you. And look what happens in verse 16. Then he said to the king of Israel, draw the bow, and he drew it. And Elisha laid his hands on the king's hands. And I love this. He's instructing him on how to use simply the objects that are in the place where he is. And I love that he didn't tell him, don't study the composition of the bow. Don't study in the intricacies of the bow or the arrow. And it's because sometimes we get so lost in the details. And this is heavy on me because I just had a conversation last night with an individual about getting caught up in the minutiae and the details. And see, sometimes we can get so caught up in the details and the trivial historical facts, which are important in the right context, but we get so caught up in knowing the trivial facts of what does the Hebrew and Greek mean, and not that those things aren't important, but we get focused on knowing those things that it doesn't require, a lot of times it doesn't require us to do anything. And so we'll revel in the fact that we know what it says in the original language, but if you do nothing with it, what help is that knowledge? What help is that knowledge? And so I love that he tells him here, just pick up the bow. Take what is already in your life, pick it up and do something with it. Do what it was created to do and do something with it. And verse 17, and this is where I'll close today. And he said, open the east window, and he opened it. Then Elisha said, shoot, and he shot. And he said, the Lord's arrow of victory, the arrow of victory over Syria, for you shall fight the Syrians in Aphek until you have made an end of them. You know, I love this because I feel like if Paul was saying this in the New Testament, he would say, I am more than a conqueror through Christ who gives me strength. I am more than a conqueror through him who loved me first. John would say it like this. John would say it as the Word became, he is the very Word that has overcome the world. This is the arrow. This is the one who overcame the world. And so I don't know where you are today in your walk, but God is the source of your supply. God is the source of your supply. He is the direction. He has positioned the right things in the supply right in front of you. He's the source of your strength. And it's the Lord's arrow of victory. But here's the beauty. He put the arrow of victory where? In your hands. He's put the arrow of victory in your hands. It's just like in the New Testament. I've got to walk my faith out with fear and trembling. All of the arrows were where? They're in my house. They were in the king's house. They're in your house. It was in his house, but he had to use it for God's glory. What do you have that the enemy has made you say is insignificant? There's things that you have in your midst, tasks and things that you've allowed the enemy to say, this is insignificant, and so I'm not going to do it. You've allowed the world to define your commute as, this is just my 9 to 5, this is what I do, and you've allowed the enemy to rob that of God's power in that moment. Because little is much in the hands of God. And so my message today is just that, as we're in this week of not forgetting, but don't forget to use what you have, and he will transform your life. Little is much in the hands of God. What is he giving you? What arrows and bows do you have in your room just sitting around you today? As you're sitting in your cubicle at work, as you're on the job site, as you're sitting at home at night and you just want to veg out, but you have a wife or a husband that is sitting in your presence and needs the love and affection and attention of their spouse. What do you have? And you're asking God to grow, and God's asking you to pick up what you have already and use it the way that he designed you to use it. Hold on to that, and you'll see transformation like no other. There's transformation in the mundane. There's transformation in the insignificant. Let God use it and transform it into what it's meant to be used for. Love y'all. Can't wait to see everyone this Sunday, 9:30 and 11. Got an amazing word. We'll talk more about that Friday. Tune into our video on Friday. Love y'all. Have a great week.